I'm Emily and welcome back to the Pepper Knits Knitting Podcast. I am a knitter based in Perth in Western Australia and thank you for joining me for episode 30. I have a good range of things to share today. I have finished objects, I have works in progress, I even have some acquisitions and a little bit of a life update. I'll share that with you now so you're not waiting until the end, but we have welcomed a new member into our family. She is laying right next to me where she usually spends most of her time. Tilly is a rescue greyhound and she is the sweetest dog I have ever met. I absolutely love her already. We've had her for just over a month now. She's about to turn 4 years old, so she still has a little bit of that playful, youthful energy, but being a typical greyhound, she sleeps pretty much the whole day until it's time for her walk. And she gets really excited and then halfway through she decides she's ready to come home and go back to sleep. So she's fitting in really well with our family. She's such a lovely companion to have whilst I'm knitting or working from home. And yeah, she's just absolutely gorgeous. I love her so much and love her company as well. Let's jump into the knitting part of the podcast and we'll start off with my finished objects. The first one is a Musselburgh hat, which is surprisingly the first time I have ever made this pattern. It was my only work in progress in the last episode, I think, so it didn't take me very long after filming that to finish this. So it has been off the needles for a little while, but I haven't been able to wear it yet because when I did finish this, the weather started to warm up and yeah, it just hasn't been cold enough to wear it properly yet. I knit this in a single skein of hand-dyed yarn from Rainbow and Sprinkles in the colour Faerie Secrets, I think. And I love how this colour has worked up in just plain stockinette like this. Obviously it's an undyed base and I love all of the bright colourful speckles that have the vibe of Rainbow and Sprinkles but a little bit more toned down than their usual really bright bases, which are gorgeous but not something I would see myself wearing. I did find that one end of the skein has more dense speckles than the other. So this side has fewer speckles and is a little bit more sparse in the colours, compared to this end that I feel like has, yeah, just more pinks and more colour overall. I think that does benefit a design like this where you're only seeing one half at a time and it kind of gives you like a 2-in-1 hat, which is great. I knit the adult medium size of the pattern and I used a 3mm needle, which I feel like gave a pretty dense fabric, but it didn't make it too stiff and it still has that nice soft drape of a superwash merino. I won't yap on too much about the Musselburgh. So many people have made it, but I will say I think it's for a good reason. I don't think it's one of those patterns that's overhyped and overpopular for not a good reason. It's such a good single skein project. You can use pretty much any needle size and knit it at any gauge that you like. And it's just really fun, easy, simple knitting. And it was a really good palette cleanser for an accessory after knitting a lot of garments. I did follow the pattern pretty much exactly for the length between doing the crown increases and then starting the decreases. And that meant that I only used 90 grams of my 100 gram skein, which is fine. I thought for my first Musselburgh, I would just follow the pattern and see how it goes. But I think next time for a 100 gram skein, I'll just use up the whole thing and have a slightly longer brim, which would be fine. I would be quite happy with that. I'm not sure if I would make more Musselburghs for myself. I don't know how many hats I need considering I don't wear them very often, but it was really fun to make and yeah, I think it would be a really great gift knit. So I'm glad I have the pattern now and in the future I'll probably make more but have them as gifts. Here is how the hat looks when it's on. So you can see the brim. It's not super long when it's flat against my head. But yeah, I think I could make it longer and then just fold this up a little bit more and it would still look really good. I just realized I'm wearing another finished object and I didn't even mention that first. So let's talk about what I'm wearing. I haven't shown this at all on the podcast. So this has been cast on and finished since the last episode. And it is a Lusk tee, which is a design by Rebecca Clow. The yarn is my favorite thing about this garment. I wouldn't really call this a jumper or a sweater because it is so lightweight. I feel like it's more similar to a long sleeve t-shirt, which essentially I suppose is what this is, considering it was a t-shirt pattern and I just added long sleeves. But regardless of that, the yarn is absolutely wonderful. It is the Kinross 4-ply, which I bought when I was back in England, and I was so excited to see this yarn in the shop that I visited with my mum when we were back over the summer. I've heard really good things about this yarn from a lot of Scottish, English, European podcasters who can easily access this yarn, and I've just been wanting to try it since hearing about it. And I think probably the first time I heard about it might have been Rebecca's podcast. The Kinross 4-ply is obviously a 4-ply yarn. It's 205 meters per 100 grams and is 100% lamb's wool, which is what makes it so lovely and soft. I am wearing this just against skin and I don't get any feeling that I'm wearing wool. There's no itchiness, no prickling. So when I bought this yarn, I ended up picking out 3 skeins of the pink colour, which is called Seashell, and 2 skeins of the white, which is Snowdrop. I think if there was like 5 skeins in a single colour, I maybe would have done that and not branched out and thought about doing stripes. But I'm really glad I had limited options and paired these 2 together in the stripes, because I absolutely love how it's come together. And yeah, it just wouldn't have been something I would have thought to have purposely gone and bought yarn for. As I mentioned, I had 100 grams total of the white and I used 93 grams of that. So I only had a tiny little bit left. And for the pink, I had 150 grams and used 125. So I have a little bit more of the pink left, but I was really pushing it in terms of yarn usage. I knit the second size in the pattern because I thought I wouldn't have enough for the third size, and I think that was a good shout. The yarn usage for the second size was 985 meters, but I only ended up using 894 instead. Interesting that I used a lot less yarn than I was expecting, but even saying that, I'm not sure if I would have had enough to knit a size up. And perhaps maybe not a lot of testers knit the long sleeves. There could be limited data to extrapolate for all of the sizes to determine the yarn usage with long sleeves, if that makes sense. So the Lusk tee, as I said, is meant to be more of a summer design with short sleeves, but it gives you the option for knitting long sleeves as well. And on top of that, you can also make it either in the 4-ply or the 8-ply, like DK weight. So no matter what yarn you have, pretty much I think you can make a Lusk tee work for that yarn, which is great. It's a very versatile pattern, similar to a lot of Rebecca's patterns. I feel like she gives so many different options that you can really change up the look of the sweater and make multiples of the same pattern but end up with different garments at the end. This has a drop shoulder construction and also has some sleeve cap short rows to give a little bit more fabric after you pick up stitches here. And I just feel like that really helps the fit of a garment, particularly when there's not a lot of ease. I think it just avoids any bunching that happens at the underarm here if there's too much fabric. I think, just having a little bit more fabric there avoids being too much at the bottom and then creating too much bunching, which I think is the reason why I thought I didn't like drop shoulders previously. But after making this, I'm slowly changing my mind. Hopefully you can see the feature of the stitches that is created here with the back shaping. And I think it looks really good with the stripes as well. Rebecca has designed this so cleverly to have, I think, 12 additional rows in the front here after you pick up stitches than in the back. So it really opens up a lot of possibilities for different stitch repeats and textures and stripe options as well. And because there's 12, that allows you to do different multiples. So you could do 2, 3, 4, or 6, or like a 12 row repeat and still have it match up when you join in the body, which is just so clever. So I knew because of the amount of yarn that I had, I would want to do some striping or some kind of combination of the 2 colors. And I did so much swatching to figure out the stripe pattern that I wanted for this, especially because I had one more skein of the pink than the white. I was really trying to figure out how I was going to not run out of the white. I think this was the first swatch that I did with 4 row stripes, which I liked, but I just didn't love it, and I was struggling to visualize it in a whole garment with 4 row stripes. And then I think the next one I did, I was trying to work out what it would look like if I used the same ratio of stripes as the amount of yarn that I had. So I did 4 rows of pink and then 2 of white. and I kind of like it, but again, I couldn't really visualize liking this in a whole garment. I think it would have just been too much pink, and I was a bit worried the pink would be too similar to my skin tone and I just wouldn't like how it would look. So then I finally swatched with the 2 row stripes, and obviously that's what I settled on. This yarn looks so different when it's blocked versus being unblocked. And I was watching Retro Claude on YouTube, and she was talking about lamb's wool, and I think she said that lamb's wool blooms so much because it has more lanolin in it than regular sheep wool, which makes sense because I definitely noticed before blocking the fabric looked a little bit holey and gapey, and the stitches weren't super even, and blocking just completely transformed the fabric. It really puffed up all of the stitches, and before blocking it was also not as soft as it was feeling in swatches, and that's one of the things that so many people have spoken about this yarn, is that it's incredibly soft. And yeah, before blocking I was like, I don't get the hype, I don't feel like it's that soft, it's not itchy, but it does feel a little bit more on the rustic side. But after blocking, it really softens up. I do really love this yarn, and I'm so grateful that I have the chance to work with it, and if I ever see it again in a shop, I will definitely be purchasing more. So I worked this on the recommended 3.25mm needles for a 24 stitch gauge, and the pattern has a 32 row gauge, and I ended up with 34 rows, so a little bit shorter. And I definitely noticed that in the sleeves I had to add quite a bit more length to the sleeves to get them to the length they are, which I'm really glad I did because they are pretty much the perfect length now. If anything, maybe a tad short after I've been wearing it for a little while. I find that especially with sleeves like this that are a little bit more fitted, the elbows tend to crease up, and as I'm wearing them and bending my arms, and they shorten slightly. Knitting the second size, I was intending to get neutral ease, which is what I've ended up with, pretty much 0 positive ease. If I was making another long sleeve version, I would probably size up just to have a different looking garment. It definitely fits fine, and I was a bit worried the sleeves would feel a little bit tight, but because I can wear this against skin, I don't feel like it is too restrictive because I'm not wearing a t-shirt or anything underneath it. But something for me to keep in mind, if I was going to make another long sleeve one, I would probably knit the 3rd size instead. I also knit all of the ribbing inside out, which is something I've only recently started doing, and I know a lot of people talk about doing this, and I'd never really tried it. Sometimes my ribbing looks fine on the right side as I'm knitting it, and sometimes with certain yarns or gauges I feel like, yeah, it does look neater on the other side. I think it was my knitting committee top, and the pattern has instructions to knit ribbing inside out, so I did it for that one, and I think this is the 2nd or the 3rd time that I've done it. I can kind of compare the ribbing like this and the cuffs. So this one is like the wrong side of the ribbing, and then this one is the right side, and I don't think they look hugely different, and if I hadn't knit it inside out I don't think I would have minded, but for some reason I did it anyway when I put the collar on, so I just continued that for the rest of the sweater. Oh, and speaking of the collar, I also did a double folded collar, which I don't think is what the pattern has, but I figured I would add it anyway and yeah, make it a bit more leaning into a sweater rather than a t-shirt. I used the trick where you're slipping the purl stitches for a few rows to make the fabric fold down, and I really love how that's turned out. I think it gives such a neater finish than a regular folded over collar, which is usually why I avoid doing a folded over collar. Sometimes I feel like they just look a little bit too bulky, but with doing the not double knitting but I guess slipping stitches, the same stitch for a few rounds, I really like how it looks. I have found that this has been a great addition into my spring wardrobe, and I see myself wearing it a lot as the weather cools down again during autumn and on those winter days where it's not quite cold enough for something really thick but I want something with long sleeves. I'm really happy with how it fits, so I'll probably end up making a summer version. Maybe this year. I don't have yarn or anything in mind for making a summer version, but I really like how it fits, so I can see myself making more of these. My next finished object is very fresh off the needles. I cast these off last night and then blocked them, and they're still a little bit damp but dry enough to share on the podcast. I have jumped on the bandwagon and have also knit myself a pair of the Seroto socks. This is a beautiful textured sock pattern by Ali from Fibrebound, who also has a podcast on YouTube. Ali very kindly gifted me the pattern, and the yarn was also gifted, which I spoke about in the last episode. This beautiful yarn was dyed by Ailsa from We Are Wool People, along with Erika from Yarniecopia, and here's the label it came with. I was very grateful to have the opportunity to design my own sock set, which has been so much fun. And the inspiration mood board I put together was some pictures of my beautiful girl Felicia, who very sadly left us a few months ago, but I love how this yarn came together in her memory, and I think Ailsa did such a good job. I can't believe how well she captured all of the colours in the mood board and how well they translate into a knitted fabric and how well they work together. Like, there's so many things I just wouldn't have thought of, and I'm just in awe of how much talent and creativity it takes to be able to dye yarn this well. This is the yarn that I have left. Of the mini, I have 8.5 grams, so I probably could have gone with a contrast teal if I wanted to, and I think Tash from Mostly Knitting knit also with a contrast teal. I will say I knit the 56 stitch size, but I assume if you knit one of the larger sizes, probably there would be enough to do contrast heel, cuff and toe. And from the main skein, I have 56 grams left, so I didn't even use half of it, which is wild to me. Usually I use just over 50 grams for a pair of socks, but I suppose that accounts for having like the same in the cuff and the toe. I don't know if the microphone is picking this up, but she is snoring so loud on the floor right next to me. And she just sleeps all day, and it's great, and I can just sit here and knit and watch YouTube videos and hang out with her while she's sleeping. Here's a bit of a close-up of the stitch texture, and hopefully it's showing off all of the beautiful variation in the yarn. I love how there are some very subtle pinky grey bits which really tie in with the pink tonal mini. It's just so clever how she's done that. I'm actually in awe of how thought out these two yarns are. The stitch texture is so much fun to knit. It's only an 8-row repeat, but it's just alternating knit 2 and purl 2, and then you have some plain knit rounds in between. So it makes it really intuitive. It's easy to read where you're up to in the chart and basically just memorize the chart after a few repeats. I actually knit most of the leg of a second sock when I was catching up with Danny from A Knitter's Suitcase. We learned that we only live like one suburb only over from each other, so such a small world, and it's lovely to actually meet people that I chat to on YouTube and on Instagram. So we met up for coffee, and I brought along my Seroto socks, and even as we were chatting and drinking our coffees, I managed to knit basically the whole leg. It just goes by so quickly, and because it's so intuitive, you can chat and not have 100% focus on what you're doing. I also feel like this stitch texture in the light brown color almost looks like a basket weave pattern. It's just beautiful. So those are my Seroto socks by Ali from Fibrebound. If this color, or like if this sock set catches your eye, or any of the other sock sets that have been designed by some other Australian podcasters, they will be available to pre-order from Yarniecopia, I think at some point during October. In the spirit of all things Socktober, I do have another pair of socks on the needles, which is a half-finished object. These look kind of ridiculous before they've been blocked, so I think I'm going to put one on a sock blocker. This is also pretty fresh off the needles. I only just finished the toe this afternoon, so I'm just on a roll with socks this October, which is really fun. I don't think I've participated like intentionally in Socktober before. So yeah, it's been really fun to be knitting socks this month. The socks that I am knitting are the Corinthian socks, which are designed by Laura from Sunday Morning Knits. And she very kindly gifted me the pattern for these socks. She sent me a message and said, in the spirit of Socktober, would I like any of her sock patterns? And it was a really hard choice. I said, I would absolutely love to knit these socks. And she said, these are the ones that she's probably the most proud of designing. So I'm really glad that I ended up going with these. Laura's sock patterns are so beautiful and unique, and They always have elements in there that I wouldn't have thought myself to put together. I have also knit her Cassandra socks, which have a beautiful like braided cable running all the way down the front of the sock, and they also have this beautiful feature, which is one of my favorite things about her socks, which is this folded over cuff. With the Corinthian socks, the folded over cuff also has some eyelet details and garter bumps, and then it runs into this beautiful like feather and fan lace for the rest of the cuff. And then the rest of the sock, as you can see, is 2x2 ribbing and finishes off with another pearl bump before doing a wedge toe, although I did swap to a rounded toe just because that's my preference, and I felt like the sock was getting a little bit too long, so I just finished it off with a rounded toe instead. I also love how the heel flap has the ribbing continue all the way down, and I think it just looks so neat and polished, and this hasn't even been blocked yet, so I cannot wait to see what it looks like when it's blocked and have all of this beautiful lace open up and the ribbing even out. Yeah, I can't wait to finish the next one and then block them and see how they look. I'm also knitting the smaller size in the pattern for this pair of socks, and as always I'm using a 2.25mm needle. The yarn that I'm using for this I actually had in stash already as some scraps left over. I say scraps, but I had like 80 or 90 grams left. I think I used it in a pair of Colourwork socks. It is the Cascade Heritage sock yarn in the colour Limestone. It is a nice yarn, it's very soft, but I felt like in my other pair of socks that I've knit with this yarn, it peels so much. Thinking about it, I might have knit those on a 2.5mm needle, so hopefully with a slightly tighter gauge I won't get too much pilling. I sent Laura a photo of my progress so far and she's like, these socks are just designed for like a light neutral colour, and I couldn't agree more with that. I think she used like a lightly speckled or variegated hand-dyed yarn for her sample, but I totally agree. I feel like this pattern really suits a light coloured neutral like this, especially with the lace. Yeah, I'm really excited to block this and see how the lace opens up. My next work in progress is very nearly finished. Technically all of the knitting is done, but I have, yeah, just a few more things to finish it off. I have been working on the Peony vest, which is designed by Annie Sews, and this was another project that I wanted to have a bit of a palette cleanser, something on larger needles, something that would work up a bit quicker, and also use yarn that I had in stash or like scrap yarn and just yarn that I have sitting around that I wanted to make into a garment or into something. The yarn that I've used is from West Yorkshire Spinners. It's their Croft Aran base, and I had quite a lot of it in the grey colour. A good few years ago I test knit for Iris, I think her username is Iris Makes, and I test knit the bonfire sweater, and I absolutely love how that sweater looks. I loved knitting it, but I ran out of yarn halfway through and had to buy another skein. So I ended up having one skein that was a different dye lot, and it was like really obviously a different dye lot. So long story short, I had a sweater that I liked the look of, but it had some really obvious dye lot discrepancies, which ended up with like micro striping the way that I tried to work in the second skein or like the last skein. And after all of that, I never wore the sweater because it was far too warm for me to be comfortable to wear where I live. I just don't need a big turtleneck worked in an Aran weight wool with, like that really thick, close-fitting turtleneck. It looked so cute. I loved how it looked. I really liked my colour combination in the end. And if you have been watching the podcast since the very beginning, it was, probably one of the first projects I shared on the podcast. So I made the decision to just frog that sweater and use the yarn for something else. So that is how this Peony vest has come to life. I felt like it was a much better use of the yarn in a vest like this, where there are no sleeves and it is, I think, at a slightly looser gauge, at least same needle size as I knit the bonfire, but I'm probably a looser knitter now, and I also paired it with a lace weight strand. So hopefully this is a better use of that yarn, and it also meant that I could knit the whole garment in what the yarn I originally purchased in the same dye lot. So I still have a single skein in that slightly different dye lot, which didn't make it into this. but that's a future me problem. At least I have used up like most of the yarn in this beautiful vest. The second strand I paired with the grey was mostly because I just didn't love how flat and boring the grey colour was. It was just a very boring, plain grey colour. There was no marling or light and dark variation to give it interest. So I thought I would pair it with a second strand, yeah, just to add a bit of colour interest and texture as well. And I do really like the halo that is given with the yarn. For most of this, I have paired the Croft Aran yarn with the Chaska Aqu Lace in a white colour, which I actually used for my bridal Cara wrap cardigan, and I had a pretty good amount left, like almost a full skein, but when I weighed it I figured it wouldn't be quite enough. So for the armholes and also for the inner button band, I used some drops kid silk mohair, also in a very similar white colour that I have had for years and is just floating around. I find that yarn really itchy, so I am not really a big fan of it and I don't really like using it. So I think for a vest like this, where I'm most likely always wearing something underneath it, I thought it would be okay. So obviously one of the main features of this beautiful vest is this wavy button band, and I love how it looks. It was really fun to knit, a little bit of mental gymnastics when it came to working the button band and the armhole shaping. It's a little bit different for me. It's not something definitely not something I would have bought in a store, but because I had the yarn ready to go and I've been wanting to use it into something, I've also been investigating whether I like vests or not, and I thought having a buttoned one would be very different to the other first vest, the Hannah slipover that I recently finished. I thought, why not just give it a go? And yeah, it was knit on 6mm needles at a fairly loose or like fairly big gauge. So it worked up super quickly and I just thought it would be a fun experiment. The gauge for the pattern is 14 stitches and 20 rows. And I did do a gauge swatch and I thought I was on gauge, but now I've blocked it and measured the final fabric and more like 13 stitches and 19 rows. So it is a little bit bigger than it should have been. I knit the second size, which should have given me about 11 centimeters of positive ease, and the recommended ease is between 5 and 10. I think if I'd knit the first size, I would have ended up with only a couple, like 2 or 3 centimeters. So it does seem like the intervals between sizes is a little bit like larger than I'm used to. I've ended up with 13 centimeters of ease, and I actually really like how that looks. And I feel like for a vest, like I said, I'm going to be wearing something underneath it, so I don't mind having that little bit extra ease to account for something underneath. My row gauge being off, however, was a little bit more of a problem than it usually is in patterns, and knowing now that it's finished and I've blocked it and have the final gauge, maybe I should have gone down to a 5.5mm needle, but that's okay. I have finished it now and I think I can make it work. The designer does emphasize the importance of row gauge in the pattern, which makes sense. Obviously with the button band being wavy, you can only really finish it at a certain point. So if your row gauge is off, you can't easily alter the length of the vest. I do kind of feel it's hard to accurately measure row gauge, even in a gauge swatch, even if you knit like a decent size gauge swatch, until you have the whole weight of the garment. I feel like it's just hard to know exactly what your row gauge is going to end up like. And when I blocked this, I did try to squish everything back in as much as possible to avoid it stretching out too much, because I did feel like it was a little bit long. Unfortunately, I do feel like it's a little bit on the long side, but I'll try it on and maybe you can tell me your thoughts and if I'm just overthinking this and it's fine as it is. I just have it on with a white t-shirt, which I think looks okay. It's not necessarily my style, so I do need to play around with how I would actually wear this, but for now it's fine. I'll just show you how the length of this has actually worked out. This is where the vest is sitting now, and I don't mind it. My hip bones are about here, so it's definitely not like a super long, oversized vest. But every time I'm putting it on and I'm trying to style it, all I do is fold it up to just above my hip bones here. And I can't help but think that looks so much better. I think because this is something a little bit outside of my comfort zone in terms of styling, I don't know if I'm used to having things at this length and I just automatically want to crop it. Unfortunately, the only way I'll be able to shorten this is if I take off both of the button bands, and there's a lot of tubular bind off in this garment, which is fine because it's at a looser gauge. It didn't take me that long. So I'd have to undo all of my bind offs, undo both ribbing of the button band, shorten it, which is not ideal with this type of garment. I'm not sure yet. The other thing is I haven't actually added buttons onto it, which you can tell. So maybe I'll put the buttons onto it so then I can get some wear out of this. And realistically probably won't get any wear out of this until after this summer. So this might go into hibernation for a little while. I think I'll add the buttons on and then just see if I wear it before committing to actually cropping it. So yeah, back to the buttons. Obviously these are closed with stitch markers at the moment, and that is because I forgot to add buttonholes into the button band. I think because I was just so focused on whether I would run out of yarn or not, I just forgot that I needed to add buttonholes. But that's fine. I think what I'll do instead is add afterthought buttonholes, which I learned from knitting my Semper cardigan, and I love how those buttonholes turned out. They're a little bit fiddly to add. Obviously it's another step and it's a lot more ends that you have to weave in, but I think it's worth it in the end. They looked really neat and tidy, and I think it will also be beneficial because I'm not sure on the length, and I also didn't have buttons picked out. Saying that though, I have looked through my stash of buttons and I think I found some that I like the look of, but they are a little bit smaller, I think, than the pattern intends. So I think doing afterthought buttonholes will allow me to hopefully make a small enough buttonhole to make these work. I think the colour works well. I think they might be a little bit too small. If I was buying buttons, I would go for something a bit bigger, but I have the perfect amount for this vest, so maybe I'll put them on and then decide whether I want it shorter or not. I can't really tell. Let me know your thoughts, and maybe I'll just leave this for a few months until autumn comes around and yeah, it gets cool enough to wear it. This is the first time I'd knit a pattern from this designer, and I loved the process of knitting it. It was really fun. The pattern was really well written and very clear. It could obviously get confusing when you're doing increasing and decreasing and increasing on the armholes, and because everything's knit flat, you're working both sides of this at the same time, but they're opposite to each other. So I think it could get confusing, but there are some really clear diagrams on what you're doing, which were very helpful. And overall, yeah, the pattern was really fun to knit. I did make one modification to the armholes. I panicked a bit. They looked really deep before I'd picked up and done the armhole ribbing. So I picked up maybe like 5 or 10 fewer stitches than I was supposed to. I did use the recommended 4mm needle to do all of the ribbing, and I think they worked out fine in the end. I think they also wouldn't have been too deep if I had just followed the pattern. This is where they're sitting at the moment, so I don't think I would be able to wear it without a t-shirt underneath. But as I said, it's not the type of garment I would wear by itself anyway. My last work in progress is kind of like on hold as well, to be honest. I started a sea salt tea back in June. I cast it on as a holiday project and got a pretty decent amount of the way through. I set it aside when I came back over the winter. I just didn't really feel like working on a summer tea. And then I picked it up again quite a few weeks ago and yeah, managed to split the sleeves. I then thought, I better try this on. It's looking a little bit wide. I was right. Unfortunately, this was just a little bit too wide and oversized for what I wanted it to, how I wanted it to fit. I have not mentioned any of the important parts about this pattern. It is called the Sea Salt Tea. I'm knitting this in Knitting for Olive cotton merino in the colour Mole. I have knit this pattern and spoken about it quite a few times, so you've probably heard me say that before. This first attempt I knit on 3mm wooded needles, and I figured my gauge would be fine. I did not gauge swatch for this, which I obviously should have done, but my gauge was a little bit too big, even on the 3mm needles, which is 2 sizes down from what the pattern recommends. And I also thought being on wooden needles, that would tighten my gauge up slightly, but unfortunately it just didn't. And when I tried this on, as you can see, I've also added the collar just to see if that would help bring it in, but I just didn't really like how it was fitting. With this type of contiguous sleeve, It's almost like a set-in sleeve. So I feel like if it's too big and sits too far off the shoulders, it just looks too big. It doesn't look intentional and oversized in a cute way. So I did decide to cast aside this attempt and start again. This is the progress that I made the second time, and then I was thinking, this feels like pretty tight fabric, but that's okay. The first time it was too loose and I wanted it to, you know, meet gauge and fit how it should. And then I think I went to cast on my Seroto socks and I was like, where are my 2.25mm needles? And that is what I had used to knit this second attempt. I was meant to use a 2.75 and just go down one needle size, but for some reason I had picked up my 2.25 and just gotten started on that. So that has also been ripped off the needles and will get frogged, but I think for now I'm just going to set this aside. I do really want the finished t-shirt. It is a really fun pattern, I enjoy making it, but I'm just, yeah, not really in the mood to be starting that for a third time at the moment. I'm really enjoying working on my socks for Socktober, so I think I'm just going to keep going on those, maybe finish off this vest as well. And I have a couple of acquisitions that are speaking to me more than that is at the moment. Maybe as the weather starts to warm up and I'm wanting to wear it a bit more, that might give me the motivation to get going again. So it's nice to have a summer tee kind of sitting there and the yarns ready for when I want to pick it up. That's a wrap on all of my projects. I do have some acquisitions to share if you would like to see them. If not, that's totally fine. I will see you in the next episode. My first acquisition is actually a gift from a lovely friend of mine who knows how much I love to knit, and they went away to Queensland and she brought me back a shawl knitting kit, which is so lovely and unexpected. And the yarn is stunning. It is so beautiful and I can't wait to knit with it. It's not something I would have picked for myself, but I feel like those are the best gifts when you wouldn't have picked it for yourself, but you still love it regardless. It is 100% Australian alpaca yarn from local breeders of southern Queensland, northern New South Wales region of the Australian Alpaca Association. So I assume it's 100% alpaca and it looks to me like it's hand dyed. This has the colour called Wallaby/Tasman, and I guess it's a 5-ply like sport weight yarn. It doesn't have a meterage on here, it just says 100 grams. It also doesn't say hand dyed, but this looks hand dyed to me, and I love the colours in this. The browns and the like neutral like undyed colours are definitely a piece of me. The blue is a bit different, but I have been feeling a bit more drawn towards blues at the moment, so it's like she was reading my mind. I do really love how these colours look together. I'm excited to see what it looks like knit into something. As it was a kit, it came in this really cute little bag with a pair of knitting needles. They're just straight needles, which I haven't used in the longest time. Maybe I'll use them just for nostalgia's sake, but I have a feeling I'll get annoyed with them and want to swap to circulars. And it also came with a simple wrap pattern. It's more like a recipe for like I think a V-shaped shawl or scarf, and then gives you instructions on how to do like a simple lace repeat. I am kind of thinking I want to make a shawl with this. I think being alpaca, it would be perfect for something really drapey like that. So I would either do like their simple lace, it's just knitted together yarn over shawl, or potentially look at another pattern. I have been thinking about making Hokey Locatelli's Lone Skein shawl, which looks really nice and obviously is perfect for a single skein. I will maybe have to think about if I would have enough meterage, because I'm not sure exactly how much is in there. My final acquisition is some yarn that I have been wanting to try for quite a while now, but I've just never quite found the right pattern or had the space on my needles for. But I'm very excited to try the Sandnes Garn Tin Lena. I purchased this from my local yarn store, Calico and Ivy, and I have it in these really fun colours. As I said, beige and brown are like my go-to colours. I'm very comfortable with them, but this green is very different for me. Kind of like this vest, it's a bit of a step outside of my comfort zone, but I think with the beige and the brown combined, these are like my safe colours that I know I like and can wear. But yeah, just something a little bit different with the green. I have swatched for what I want to knit this into, and I want to make the Amelia blouse by Solvara Knitwear. I have had my eye on this pattern for a really long time, and yeah, I'm excited to have the yarn now ready to cast it on. Here's my swatch in those beautiful colours, and I'm so glad I went for the green. I really hope I like it in the finished garment, but I really like how it looks all together in the yarn. And then as I was doing the swatch, I fell in love with it a little bit more. So I'm really hoping in like the whole blouse, I do also really love it. The pattern is worked on 3mm needles, and obviously it's like a long sleeve top. I do find that the yarn is quite splitty, so I think it will be a long process to knit one. I'm not quite sure when I want to cast it on. I think I might finish my second Corinthian sock and then have those socks off the needles before I start something like that. But I'm looking forward to getting started. It was really fun doing the swatch, and I didn't find the pattern repeat too hard to memorize. It is also worked bottom up, which I haven't worked a lot of garments bottom up. I think it is necessary for like the nature of the stitch pattern, so I'm interested to see how that goes. I have knit one of Solvara's patterns before, the Daisy sweater, and that fit quite well, so I have high hopes that it should be okay. If I just trust the pattern, it will end up okay. That brings me to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I would love to know what you've been working on or what you're casting on in the near future, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye!